The war and its consequences are becoming unavoidable for Russia, the country with the third biggest production in crude oil and the third biggest refinery capacity is having a fuel crisis. But we'll talk about this as well as about anything else that has happened along the front lines and behind them in this sitrep about the war in Ukraine. Russia is bordering a fuel crisis. The production has reduced by 10% since the beginning of 2025. In total, it's 17.3% lower than the average production that Russia usually produces. The fuel prices thus have already increased by 50% since the beginning of the war. According to the Russian government, companies that do not produce their own fuel are banned from exporting it until the end of October. Producers are banned until the end of September so far. All of this is a clear sign that the Ukrainian strikes against refineries are having their effect as the Russian capacity to create fuel is being reduced. The same result is also achieved by the attacks on the fuel storages where available fuel is being stored. They have been struck over the past 2 years. A lot of them have been destroyed. A lot of them have been struck, and it's showing its effect. The attacks continue. The Ukrainians have struck the LNG production in Ust-Luga. According to what we see in geolocation, it was a full hit and a fire has started. Also, the Sirsan oil refinery in Samara was also hit, and it's one of the big fuel producers for the Russians. So an additional reason why fuel is running out. Then we have a Russian soldier confirming in an interview that he himself has executed Ukrainian soldiers. According to him, the order to do that came from above. 5 Ukrainians were led to an area that was not where it was unlikely that there would be surveillance, so the Ukrainians don't see it on a drone. Their body armor was taken away from them and they were being executed by being shot from behind. This shows once again that this is not the excess that is happening along the front line, which happens unfortunately in all wars over time with the soldiers being completely disillusioned and desensitized. Crimes do happen, but it shows that the orders come from above and that there is no punishment. This is in accordance to a fresh video that is also circling around where the Russians themselves showed them striking a man having a walk with his dog in Kherson, and it was spread around with pride. So attacks against civilians are being published as well by the Russians without any repercussions. We talked about it in the past quite a lot that war crimes unfortunately do happen in wars. But the big difference is how the responsible governments do take care of it. Do they start a prosecution? Do they punish the war criminals? Or do they encourage or even order those war crimes? And unfortunately, the thing here is pretty clear. There was also an exchange of prisoners of war. 146 were exchanged by either side, but also 3 civilians got free, 3 Ukrainians. Among them was the mayor of Kherson. That was it. With this, we switch to the developments along the front line, and here we start in Sumy. I do not see any changes. I cannot observe anything along the front line. We switch to the Kharkiv region, and here we have a geolocation that the Russians are back at the factory here. This is the factory, the plant inside of Vovchansk. That is one of the areas that was contested by both sides for quite some time. A few weeks ago, probably 3 months ago, the Ukrainians recaptured it in full. Now we have the Russians back inside of it. That's it from the Kharkiv region. We switch to the Eastern Front, and here we have the deep state map showing a significant extended Russian control close to Kupiansk and inside of Kupiansk, and we have a geolocation of Ukrainians clearing a house obviously occupied by Russian soldiers in the northernmost part of Kupiansk. This, in accordance to the pro-Ukrainian deep state map, is an indication that the Russians now have actually entered Kupiansk in the northwest and probably gained a foothold. The geolocation was here, but as you can see, the pro-Ukrainian deep state map still gives significant parts of Kupiansk to the Russians, so the Russians likely now have a foothold inside of this important town. That was it on the Eastern Front until we reached the Seversky Donetsk. I do not have anything else north of it, but south of it in the Seversk region, I do not have anything either. We switch to the Konstantinovka region, and here we have the Russians north of Bilahora, which is here. This is geolocated that the Russian soldier was attacked at this point here, indicating that the Russians are entering the tree lines north of Bilahora as well. The Russians have also advanced inside of Oleksandro Shultyne. We have a fresh geolocation, actually several fresh geolocations from this region where the Russians are now operating inside of this area here as well, where they are having fresh positions. To which degree Oleksandro Shultyne is now under control by the Russians is unclear. We see the deep state maps showing it, parts of it as contested. This is probably the truth right now, but obviously from afar it's not that easy to say in which area there is a consolidated control. But we do have reoccurring proof of the Russians being inside of Oleksandro Shultyne. Further south, we have the Russians inside of Shcherbinivka. We have a geolocation here as well at this point where the Russians are in the northern part of Shcherbinivka at the railroad yard. This is here at this point. Where this soldier came from is unclear, but we recently had a geolocation a little bit further north, so it's possible that the Russians have come from the west or from the south, to which degree it would obviously indicate different areas of control. Whether or not Shcherbinivka is now captured is unclear. So far, I have not had any confirmation, any indication, so they might have come from the east, especially as we recently just had another proof that Russian soldiers were inside of the mine northwest of Toretsk. That's it from Konstantinovka. We move to the Pokrovsk region, and here a very interesting one, as we have the Ukrainians operating east of Mykolaiv or Novoekonomichne. We have them here to the east of it in the tree lines. So Ukrainian soldiers have reached this point. This is a clear indication that obviously Novoekonomichne and Mykolaiv cannot be under Russian control. Either they have been recaptured or they are fully a gray zone, as we can see here too, as the deep state map is claiming. And we have the Russian mill blogger Romanov, who says the Ukrainians even reached the town of Mirne because the Russians do not actually control Novoekonomichne, and Mirne is up here. So this is a confirmation. Novoekonomichne and probably Mykolaiv as well are not under Russian control. They might not be under Ukrainian control either, so fully inside of the gray zone. But what we do have here is a proof that the Ukrainians recently operated east of those two towns. Then, other than that, we have nothing from the Pokrovsk region. We switch to the Dnipro region, and here we have the Russians inside of Filia. This is north of Yalta. In a recent sitrep, I showed you that the Russians had taken this part. Now they apparently crossed over the Vovcha, and is it Vovcha? I think it's Vovcha. Exactly. Over the Vovcha, over the river here, they crossed over it and have entered the town of Filia. Whether or not they captured it, I cannot confirm at this point, but we do have visual evidence that they were inside of it. Further south, the Russians have also entered the town of Vorone. We also have that geolocated here, where the Russians are inside of this town. Here's the geolocation of it, that they have entered the town. This here was the correct one. It slipped around a little. I apologize. So the Russians have entered the eastern part of Vorone. We have that visual proof of it, and they have entered Zaporiske and likely taken it. As we can see, visual evidence shows them showing their flag, and we have geolocations all over the town from the north to the center. That makes it likely that Zaporiske is now under Russian control. In this case, it would mean that 3 towns inside of Dnipro Oblast are now occupied by the Russians in case they captured it. And that's the overall front situation. So other than that, no changes. The Russians have probably gained a foothold now inside of Dnipro and another foothold inside of Kupiansk, both obviously problematic. Should Kupiansk fall, then the whole pocket here will likely be collapsed soon afterwards, or somewhat soon afterwards, as the supply for all of the Ukrainian positions in here will be very difficult to keep up. This is already going to be increasingly difficult as the line of communication inside of Kupiansk is fully in strike range now for the Russians, while they have entered the town itself as well. And in the south, Dnipro itself, the towns are probably without any bigger strategic importance, but obviously for the Russians to have entered another oblast is a moral is of big importance in moral wise, as this could lead them to add additional claims, territorial claims in the future, with them now being in another oblast here at this point. Then we have news from the in regards to sabotage. Bloomberg is reporting intensive jamming and spoofing, now mostly over the complete Baltics, also in parts of Finland and Poland. This is causing increasing problems for flights, radio navigation is being jammed, etc. And all of this is happening in places where there's little justification for this, as obviously it's understandable that it's happening at points where the Ukrainians are striking, but this is happening in areas where it isn't, where this is not the case, and this is thus being considered hybrid warfare, as obviously the jamming of navigation will impede air flights, will impede ground traffic as well, and thus cause economic damage too. Then we have the GUR, the Ukrainian military intelligence, saying that a house in Luhansk with Russian soldiers in it was blown up by pro-Ukrainian activists. 3 Russians were killed, 2 others were wounded. In the political sphere, we have Putin saying that Trump's presidency is the light at the end of the tunnel, and he expects that over time the relationships with the relationship with the United States will fully recover. Trump, on the other hand, is emphasizing that he's heavily unhappy with the current state of the peace negotiations, or with the hope for peace negotiations. As we can see, there is no willingness whatsoever from the Russian side to give in. There is no sign of them willing to make any compromises. Instead, the opposite is the case. Basically, daily, the war aims are being emphasized again. For instance, Lavrov now said that Zelensky is the problem for peace, and obviously that makes it unlikely that Putin is going to meet him individually, as this would legitimize Zelensky in the eyes of the Russians. The Western states, he also said, Lavrov said, the Russian foreign minister, the Western states who caused a coup, this is how he calls the revolution of 2014, the Western states who are responsible for a coup cannot be the security guarantors for a future Ukraine. So basically saying the West cannot have a say in Ukraine's security either. One more reason why any potential negotiations are not progressing. In international support, the US have signed off on the sale of 3,350 ERAM. Those are extended range attack munitions. They are bought for Ukraine from European states. The range is unclear here. Different literature talks about 240 to 450 kilometers in range. The whole weapon is in the 500-pound range. That's not 500-pound warhead. The warhead is part of these 500 pounds, so probably less than 100 pound, or maybe 100 and something pound, somewhere in their ballpark. This is a new cruise missile that was developed for the Ukrainians for the Americans to have a cheap system, and it was bought for the Ukrainians in this regard. But at the same time, it became clear that the US are blocking any strikes against Russia since spring to de-escalate. So to which degree those cruise missiles will be of a bigger help for the Ukrainians is unclear. Ukraine is also getting financed 2 Patriot systems by Norway, and Norway has also agreed to pay $8.45 billion in 25 and 26 for Ukraine. So significant aid coming from Norway for Ukraine. Canada has said that 1 billion Canadian dollars are being spent on armored vehicles, drones, and ammunition for Ukraine. In total, 2 billion in aid was promised to the Ukrainians for this year. And that was it with today's sitrep. If you enjoyed it, please give it a thumbs up. It helps with the algorithm. Leave a comment if you have something to add. And if you're new here, I would like to invite you to subscribe to the channel and hit the bell icon so you don't miss future videos. But that's it from me for now. Thank you for watching, and I'll be back.